So how do you think it went last week?
Pretty good, I think. I have no idea.
yeah, that is definitely the case.
I swung from I hate it to I love it back again about twice, I think.
Yeah, it's very hard to know whether it's any good or not. So we'll find out. We haven't released it yet, so
we'll find out after the third. We're going to do 3 sort of pilot episodes. So if you're listening, then potentially we've done all 3.
Yeah, that is true. So hopefully that's good. So, did you have anything you wanted to follow up on from last week? Now we've listened to it back a couple of times.
Not really. No, sorry to be the damp. I know you did.
That's okay. That's good. I was taking a small drink of juice there, so I used it as a good excuse.
Non-Diet Coke product.
I did have a few things. I don't know whether this will stir your memory or not, but we should do them anyway. A few things I had here. It was mainly on the second topic we spoke about, which was on the PC stuff.
Okay.
I think we were just getting a bit tired by the end, so I forgot some of the arguments I actually wanted to make. So the first one was the developer edition of the Dell XPS, so the one that you can buy from Dell that actually has Ubuntu in it natively.
Oh, yes.
I think you asked me about whether I'd pick a Linux install or not, and I said no, mainly because I thought it'd be a bit of a pain, I think is what I said.
Yeah.
Because it's not going to sleep properly and stuff. But I believe that one product there is specifically designed to be fully supported by Dell.
Yeah.
So it could be an option and should be probably considered.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Just say even if you're going to run Windows on it, it's nice to know that you could.
Yeah, exactly. So I imagine in that situation you'd probably dual boot.
Yeah.
But at least you know Ubuntu is going to work and they've got all the right drivers.
Yeah,
that's cool. The big problem, I think.
Well done, Dell.
Yeah.
That's good.
I assume it's still available. It definitely was a big thing a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I feel like it's lost steam a little bit because I just haven't read much about it. But
I wonder if Bash on Windows has sort of killed that off a bit.
Maybe. Well, they're still not the same. So
no,
I imagine.
That's true.
I don't know.
The other thing then was, again on that topic, is around the repair process of Mac versus Dell, which we spoke about yesterday, and actually something that I think is not great. So the Apple Store experience when you want to go in and get something fixed is just a bit rubbish.
Should we talk about the Mrs. experience?
Yeah, which actually I don't think was that bad. I've heard of worse. I mean, there's 2 things that are going on at the moment. One is in the US, right? The Apple geniuses basically just making stuff up and being like, you should just buy a new laptop. Yeah, I don't know if you saw that.
I have seen a few things, yeah.
So there's that, and then my other half had to get her MacBook Pro hard drive repaired because of it was in one of their replacement programs. There was a potential issue of data loss with the hard drive, so they fixed that. But that went okay. It's more the biggest issue for her was more getting an appointment. So she was looking, and they only do appointments a week in advance, and they're always all sold out. So you always have basically 7 days time, and then not a lot of choice. So you look today, the next one's probably going to be in a week's, in 7 days time. There's none between now and 7 days time.
We were talking about this before, but I don't know if that's true. Probably not. I'd imagine that's not the case in the States. Maybe. But we were saying in London, where we live, there's only 4 Apple stores.
Yeah.
And that's not enough for a city with 10 million people or whatever.
Yeah.
So, I've had the same experience. It's shocking. How long did she end up waiting in the store?
She probably was there about an hour, I would guess.
That's not too bad.
So they knew because it wasn't like, I don't know what's wrong with it, fix it. It was I'm here for the replacement, under the extended program to upgrade the firmware.
Yeah.
Now the other benefit is that I have a Synology NAS here that can act as a time machine. So she time machined it, and it actually recovered. It went overnight, but it basically did start again as if nothing had happened. So that was quite impressive.
That is good.
So from that point of view, it was okay. But having had experience with Dell, as an example, I mean, they will do, if you're willing to pay for it, of course, they will do next working day to your house to come and repair stuff, which I think is very nice. And I think, particularly as a professional developer, if you're working from home, I think having that optionality, and they don't even have to come to your house. You can say, come to this address. So when I used to work at a previous place, I had an old laptop that might have been when I was an intern, actually. It broke, and I said, can you just come to work? and fix it there. And they were like, yeah, no problem.
And they did.
Yeah,
that's
next
awesome.
day. So that's pretty cool. But there's a cost involved in that. It's not sort of built in.
I think that's probably. I think if you are a professional, like I think we were talking about, my Mac Touchwood has not broken for 3 years.
Yeah.
And I think if it did break with something that was non-trivial and not in a holiday, which let's face it's like most of the time, I think I would probably just buy another one.
Yeah.
And then get the old one repaired and then sell it.
Well, because they were saying, I think yesterday, if they couldn't have done the firmware fix, which they did in store, it would be a 5-day turnaround to replace the hard drive.
Not okay if it's your job and you need that thing, which most people do. So you'd pretty much. It's kind of annoying, but they are pro laptops, so they have pro in the name.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
So
just
pro.
Gotta deal with it.
You just got to you have to be without it for 5 days, like any pro. Just take a holiday, pro holiday.
A week.
A week. Yeah, just take
I assume it's 5 working days as well.
Yeah. So it might be like 7 days.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's a big one. I know. I'm surprised actually that Apple have never changed that. I think going into store, it would make a lot of sense, particularly in big cities like this, to just have a few people on the ground that could go to people's houses.
Anything. Yeah. Or come. Yeah.
Like in a small area.
If they said to me, we'll come and fix it, and someone will probably be able to fix it there and then. I mean, they can't always say that. Yeah. Or even just bring the replacement laptop. That'd be amazing. Yeah. Just so they've got that in their back pocket. If they were like, we'll come out and it'll cost like 200 or 300 quid. If it's like, for me, it's like a day's like contract work.
Yeah.
That's probably worth it.
I guess it comes down to as well how repairable Dell laptops are. Because Dell, I mean, I say that particularly the business ones, I mean, you can replace any component.
Yeah, Macs, not so much.
Not like that. And I think there are definitely some Dells now, like the XPS ones, I think that have that same problem. But I know all the business ones, they have manuals that they actively publish to be like, this is how you take it apart.
I mean, I wouldn't even mind if they just gave me another one. I guess with a laptop more than a phone, it's annoying.
As long as you have Time Machine or something, then I guess you're fine.
Yeah.
I just don't know, like, if you don't have a NAS like mine or like one like that, can you Time Machine to any device? I guess not. I don't know if you can just like have a Windows machine in the corner and time machine to the time. I think
I've done it a long time ago, but I gave up. But to be honest, I now use Macup, which I think I mentioned before in the last show, but it just backs up all my whatever files to Dropbox, and then I just reinstall everything from scratch, which is it does take a bit, but you can probably get up and running in like an hour because you just install
I guess you just install things as you need them.
Yeah, and you've got the configs there, so when you install them, it's all and obviously most code is in version control.
Yeah.
And then the only things I have on my computer as a purist developer. So just code.
I think for my other half it's more difficult because she's a UX designer. She has a lot of files that aren't checked in.
Yeah.
I mean, they are on like Google Drive, but I think the setup is a pain.
Those files are big as well. Yeah. They're like hundreds of megs sketch files.
So that's something else. The other thing I realised I didn't do, or I forgot, was I didn't actually say why I didn't like macOS.
Oh,
really? I don't think I did.
Hit us with it.
Well, I don't think I have a good enough answer.
You did mention a bit. You said you showed some disdain for the fact that the command line utils aren't consistent with Linux.
That is one that annoys me And I think as well, and I suppose actually thinking about it now, we might just have to cut this out, but we were talking about the memory usage being a bit fat, and I guess that was that. Maybe there isn't much else I wanted to add there. Thinking about it now out loud, but anyway, let's move on from that one. So the other one was, I think we both agreed that we didn't like C++, but we didn't again say why.
Yeah.
Do you have a way of saying why you dislike C++?
I had a chat today at the tea point with the bloke who sits opposite me,
the
Rocket Man. He was today building the firmware, like the speedo for a car, and he showed me the physical speedo in real life.
What, that he's programming?
Is awesome. Yeah, no, he's this guy. He's like my hero. I build crappy web apps. That's basically what I was saying. But I was chatting to him about it. I don't know if I have a particular. I hear that the language features it's been updated pretty regularly. Yeah. I feel like the barrier to entry with it is frankly horrendous. It looks terrifying, and it's quite. I don't know if verbose is like the word I'd use, but the language is.
So the way I think about it is, having seen it a bit more recently, is it's basically it's very open ended. You can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
Like anything you feel like you're inhibited with if you're doing something like Java, which you might do.
Yeah.
You don't. You can literally do anything with C++, and it won't. The other thing it doesn't do, like Java, is protect you from very much. So, like for example, I'm doing some open source stuff at the moment at work, and writing a C++ library for KDB, and I was getting this weird error. And I was like, what the hell's going on here? And then I asked one of the C++ guys, and he was like, oh, yeah, I would probably interpret that as you've got a string as a pointer, but it doesn't have a null terminated character, so it's just reading off the end until it finds one, and then you're getting just some garbage from memory.
Yeah, that's
horrendous. And I was like, what? Why is it? I've just asked for a string. Why is it not a string? Yeah. And he was like, oh, you need to tell it how long the string is. I'm like, well, can't it do that for me?
Yeah,
no.
That is...
Apparently not. So I was like, it's just those sort of things that you're like, ugh, it's clearly trying to be, it's obviously very, very flexible, but you're losing a lot with that. And the errors as well are, the compiler errors are better than I think they used to be, or they're better in C++ than they are in C.
You used to have to basically maintain a memory map in your mind of like, when it says this, it actually means this. Is it changed?
Yeah, it's still like that, because the way I think they built C++, I don't know a lot of the detail, but I think the way they built C++ on top of C means that when it's compiling, you don't get like, the class isn't the obvious class. It's like all the types have lots of like prefix bits to it that are sort of describing the method.
Okay.
So, like in Java, you have a way of defining the method program. Like, it's like when you use J and I, you're like, oh, the method name is method, and then it takes 3 integers. So then it's like I, and it's a void returning function. So then you've got a V.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
There's like a method description in like a single string. It does that everywhere in C++. So when you see the error, it's like, oh, method... underscore. No, it does give it in there, but because it's got all this sort of other characters around it, it's like underscore C++ underscore standard underscore string underscore basic string, because that's actually the implementing class. Yeah. You're like, where the hell is this talking about? And the references in the file are not the line numbers, at least by default. It's like text. It's giving you like an address offset from where it was going to build the code and stuff. And you're just like, this is awful. So you have to, rather than it just being, I can look at it and know what the problem is, you have to actually read and understand them.
I guess the thing with languages like that is if you are an absolute pro that's been doing it for 10 years, that probably all melts away. And so when they're listening to us talking about this now, they'll be like, that's not, they don't even see that when they see that, their brain just bridges that gap. Whereas for you and I, we're just used to the language, giving us sensible error messages and not having to say how long a string is. Yeah. I mean, that is...
So I think the reason I don't like it, even though I'm trying to use it a little bit, is just you have to just deal with a lot more yourself. You have to think about, is this string terminated? You have to think about, is this object going to be available? Referenceable or whatever. It's got to be in scope and not uninitialized before it's been used.
Right.
You're managing these individual objects and making sure they're alive long enough to be referenced later on.
Right.
And so you can't just say, oh, if I create this object, it will stay and get automatically cleaned up, because you don't get that, obviously. You're I have to create this object, keep track of this object, and then somehow know when it's done to then remove it, or else you've got a huge memory leak.
And there are obviously some things some problems you might want to solve, like more deterministic running times. It's probably pretty good at, because you're managing your own memory. So if you want to know that a program's never going to stop for garbage collection, then C++ is which for like real time trading and all those sorts of like maybe just sort of any kind of events processing-y kind of things is probably pretty good.
Yeah, I think at the point where, so what's interesting I think about that is, I think if you're thinking about optimizing Java to not garbage collect. At that point, the difference between Java and C++ probably isn't that far away.
No.
The difference is how quickly you get to the point where you're like, now I need to optimize.
Yeah.
Whereas I think with C++, you start that process from the start. With Java, you can be like, let's just build something that works.
Yeah.
And then you go, oh, let's have a look at the profile here. Oh my God, it's garbage collecting every 10 seconds because I'm leaking a load of stuff. And we actually had that issue. There's one of the guys at my current place has spent a lot of time optimizing. We use this software called Aeron, Aeron, which is like a reliable multicast system. So you run this Aeron media driver, they call it, on each server, and you talk to it locally by IPC. So there's no networking involved. But then across servers, it's maintaining these connections and making sure that everything gets to where it needs to be, but it's UDP, but reliable, so it deals with that retransmission.
Right. So everything's sent over UDP.
Yeah, but reliably.
So you get certain guarantees that messages will definitely get there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the media driver itself is written in Java. So we've had that issue where it is garbage collecting.
And misses a message.
Well, it doesn't miss a message, but then you get a huge lag. Right. So that we're using Aeron between our sort of exchange interface process and our order accepting process.
Yeah.
So then there's a garbage collection in the time so the message gets sent out, but it's garbage collecting. So you have a delay of say 100 milliseconds.
Right.
But we're required by the exchange to respond within 300 milliseconds, say.
Right.
And if you don't, then it gets rejected.
God, that sounds terrifying.
Yeah.
So like,
you
need it to work.
Yeah. So then you're like, oh, now the fact that it's in Java is a problem. Yeah. So then it weighs up there. But I think there are very in the whole grand scheme of programming things that you want to do, I guess for me, where I'd pick C++ would be a very small percentage of that.
Yes. Yeah. That's how I see it. Like if you're writing like something that needs like to have a very low probability of not responding within a certain period of time, then C++ that is particularly strong there. I think if you have like masses of data, then something like, memory, garbage collected language, memory managed, is it memory managed? Is that what they say? But like C# or Java or Go or whatever you want to use, that will probably, that you'll get a few pauses, but like, who cares if it's like a few hundred milliseconds and you're just doing something that takes like 10 seconds, it's not really going to matter. So I guess that is the place where it's still, the thing is as well though, I don't know enough about it to know, because I know there's like Boost. That's a big thing. Interestingly, they've moved away from Boost a little bit, and there's another one called Ace. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's part of Boost, but the C++ expert in my company has made an effort to move away from that. Mm-hmm. I don't know the reasons behind that, but we'll just say that's what he's decided to do. Okay, cool. So that was it. I just wanted to say it's easy to be like, I don't like X without at least trying to justify our position, which I feel like we've done there. Okay, the final one, and then we will stop and move on. There was a point you made when I was listening back to the first episode about parentheses, and I misunderstood round brackets and curly brackets, which was problem number one. But extremely embarrassing.
After we got through that minor issue, there was actually a point that after I sort of died of embarrassment listening to this on the tube. So what was interesting about KDB, I wanted to say about this is that KDB, developers made a decision to make it right to left evaluated.
Ooh.
So the weird benefit of doing that is that you need a lot fewer brackets to make a statement make sense.
So let me just see if I've got this right. So if you're, say for example, anding two things, so they're like and operator, ampersand, mm-hmm. and you wanted to say X ampersand, Y ampersand, Z.
Yeah.
That would be evaluated. So Z, it would go Z, Y, X. It would go from right to left.
Yeah. And it also does it in the case of mathematical operators. So it doesn't follow the standard mathematical operators.
Dear God.
Which sounds like a pain, but when you see it,
you get used to it.
In my head now, I don't think I can. I feel like I know I would write stuff right to left evaluated more than following the standard mathematical process.
Do you think that this means that you could potentially learn one of the languages? Is it like Arabic goes from right to left?
Maybe,
do you think you'd just be like, this is completely fine?
Yeah, I don't know. It's weird. Like for a long time, it grated with me, and then being able to write expressions where you don't have to bracket actually makes things a lot clearer.
So, is it expression evaluation goes from right to left, or are there times
it's always right to left?
It's always right to left. What about like
within a so in like an if statement, it's obviously got to evaluate the if condition, and it'll evaluate that condition right to left, and then it will execute each line right to left.
Do you have, say, like function parameters? Can you call functions in it? Do the function parameters still go left to right?
Yeah. So if you had you'd have 3 arguments, and you'd still pass them in a standard way. The leftmost is the first. Second one is the second. So it's kind of, so it's just all the infix operators, is that the technical term? So the operators which go in between two things, they all go right to left. No exceptions? Nope.
That is a bit mental.
But the other thing is they've made brackets generally optional.
Right.
So, for example, you use square brackets to signal arguments for a function. So rather than round brackets in Java.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, but if the function only takes one argument, you can just omit the square brackets and it behaves the same way.
Yeah, okay. Python kind of has that.
Does it?
With it used to. I think it's maybe discouraged now, but you used to be able to say like print space, I think.
Yeah. So so for logging, it's quite nice.
Yeah.
And it means, I don't know. I think we're probably going to separately have a more in-depth discussion about KDB. But I did want to mention that is interesting, and initially it sounds ridiculous, but maybe when we do that in-depth walkthrough, I can show you some and have some for in a
my mind can get
show.
blown.
Yeah, but that was that really. So that's it from my follow-up.
What are we talking about today?
According to this,
this official document.
We're going to talk about JavaScript.
Oh yes.
I put in brackets after JavaScript in our notes why the love as a question mark, because I don't like JavaScript. I'll put my initial point there, and obviously you, Rich, spend your life in it.
Yeah, I do. We should probably explain, how much time have you spent in JavaScript, roughly? I'm guessing not.
I know JavaScript. The language, I would say, very, very well. But I've never done any serious JavaScript development in the way that I think a lot of people are doing now.
Kind of the ecosystem, or whatever you want to call it.
So, when I was... The last time... At the point where I seriously knew what I was doing in JavaScript, jQuery was the big thing.
Yeah.
So that's, 5 years ago?
Yeah, I remember when we were at university, we did a project with a friend of ours.
Yeah.
You guys did all the JavaScript, and I remember feeling really confused the entire time. And now, ironically, I work in JavaScript and you two don't, and it's like my thing.
Yeah, that's true.
Funny how things have changed. But
so I think I know JavaScript's changed a lot since then.
Yeah.
And nothing particularly fills me with confidence about it or makes me want to jump ship for a number of reasons. And we're recording this at the end of November, so we'll mention one topic in specifically that has come up, more to do with the ecosystem than JavaScript itself. Although JavaScript itself, if anybody reads Programmer Humor on Reddit, I mean, every other joke is about the ridiculousness of JavaScript.
Yeah.
But okay, so I mean, I've given my intro. What do you think about Java? Or where would you start if I said to you, why do you like JavaScript?
Ooh. So how long have I should probably say how long I've spent with it. About 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
Professionally, and I would say I was about the same as you. Before that, I didn't really know what I was doing. So what was the question? Why? Why do I like it?
Well, there's two issues, right? You do JavaScript because you make websites, and there's no real other alternative.
No, yeah.
So I guess the first question is, even though you use it every day, do you actually like the language?
Yes. I guess when you say, like, when we talk about like JavaScript, there is the language, like a programming language, which is literally what it means. But then there's obviously also like what I would call the ecosystem. So the package manager, and then also Node, which is obviously sort of JavaScript. But for those of you that don't know, Node is the sort of server-side runtime. So you can run JavaScript programs on the command line, basically. So what I really like about JavaScript is the community and the other tools and the libraries. But the language itself was a mess. Was definitely 2012, 13, just an absolute mess. Now the cutting edge I think is perfectly fine. Like I think it's pretty good. It's I wouldn't say it's drastically better than any other language. I would say it holds its own. It's as good as another modern language. I wouldn't say it was much better than worse than, I don't know, whatever, like something like Python, or I'm trying to think what else there is. Scala has too many features probably, but it has a lot of features that a lot of other languages have now.
Yeah, and what is that? Is that ES7?
I don't even know. Yeah, ES 2020. No, I don't know.
Oh, they go by year now.
They go. No, they go by year, and the year's offset. It's confusing. ES6 is what people normally refer to it as, but I sort of mean somewhere between ES6 and 7. I think for the day's conversations.
Right. Okay.
So and I think it's the ecosystem that draws me in. But oddly, I was drawn in by another ecosystem, which really reminds me of this one before, which was Ruby on Rails, which was something I learned. I worked professionally with for about a year and a half before I came to JavaScript. And that was, before that, I was a big enterprise kind of, I did a lot of Java and C#.
Yeah.
And those are really different to Ruby on Rails, and again, really different to Node. And it feels a lot like the momentum from Ruby on Rails as the sting's been taken out of it. I mean, I'm sure there are maybe some Ruby on Rails programmers listening, but the one listener might program in Ruby on Rails. But
Ruby on Rails HMRC person. Yeah.
Yes, Philip Hammond, who likes Ruby on Rails. But I think a lot of that momentum's moved to JavaScript now, and it's to do with libraries and open source and how many GitHub projects there are compared to something like Java that makes me like it. I also have to say that maybe not so much now, but still now, but not so much. I actually find it's exciting. It changes all the time, which is a big downside, but also you don't know when you're going to wake up in the morning, and there are like new things being created all the time. And we went through a very intense period of change, which I feel like we're mainly through now for sort of the last 2 or 3 years, where an idea or a library would come out, and then everyone would be like, this is great, and then something else would come out and everyone was like, this is great, let's trash the old thing. And I think like build systems, like as an example, we had like Grunt, then Gulp, then Webpack, probably in the space of like 2 years. And basically I started doing projects with Grunt, then I started doing them with Gulp, but now Webpack is sort of stuck for a year or two for that sort of thing. But a lot of that pain is going away as well. So
oh yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, whether we come to it now or later, I think the ecosystem is, I think, potentially the biggest weakness of JavaScript at the moment, right? Like
it's a strength and a weakness,
because I think I put a link in our little notes that we had here of a programmer humor joke I saw earlier, but it wasn't a joke necessarily, but it was a picture of a Twitter thread where somebody was like, there's a node or an npm package for isEven, which literally all it does is give you a function isEven, and that has like 250 million uses.
Yeah.
And you're like, and then it's like isodd, but isEven depends on isodd, because it's like isEven is not isodd, and it's like, and you're like,
I can believe that.
Yeah, and it's that sort of stuff that you're like, okay, clearly, I guess a lot of it is people have embraced. I guess npm makes it easy to import to import other modules, and then it's just got to a sort of silly state where people just import everything rather than even considering writing it themselves.
So npm, I feel like I'm going to say a lot of controversial things in this segment, but npm is the best package manager I've ever used. RubyGems is the second best, and everything else I don't even have ranked in my mind. But I think they're both very good, but npm I think is. It's not. I actually use Yarn, not npm, but we can get into that. But it is, in terms of ease of use, compared to, I've used Maven and Gradle quite a lot, and NuGet, which is actually probably near the bottom of my list in my opinion. I find that one difficult to use, but it's just very. I think partially because it's just the people using this stuff perhaps they don't come from an enterprise background, so they sort of almost, maybe they've been forced to make it a little bit easier, but it's just easy and it works pretty well. npm does have some problem. Yarn is the one to use at the moment, but it changes a bit. But npm, but it makes it really easy to publish packages. And then there was a package called leftpad, which padded. What did that? Do you remember what that did? It's something to do with strings.
Ridiculously simple.
Yeah, it's something like it takes a string and adds a certain number of characters to the left or something,
Yeah.
which again was used by millions of other things. And then the maintainer deleted
His repo, I think.
he deleted it from npm.
Yeah.
So then anything that used that transitively broke, and it basically just broke everything. It's just almost, if you had a project that depended on a thing, it probably depended on leftpad, and leftpad was no longer there. So when you ran npm install to install your dependencies, it was game over.
Yeah.
And there was one this week which was very similar that broke.
It didn't break, right? But there was actually a backdoor added.
Yeah, so somebody
to Event Stream, I think the name of the package.
Yeah. So there's a package called Event Stream, which I think is used in Node, and there's a really popular package called NodeMon, which I know that I use and a lot of people use, and that uses Event Stream. Event Stream uses another thing which I've forgotten the name of, and that was the one that.
Well, no, that was added in. So it didn't have any. Whatever dependency.
They added a dependency.
He added it in, and the dependency was encrypted. So they just were like whatever, and then, but it was actually within that encrypted added package that it was attacking one of the Bitcoin wallets explicitly.
Yeah,
whatever it was called, and so there's a thing, right? I would agree with what you said, and it's going to sound potentially snobbish, but I feel like the people who wrote npm weren't necessarily computer scientists, or
probably were, but yeah, I know what you mean. But
there's that feeling that it's they've gone, what is the simplest way to do this without considering any of the real life maintainability of these projects, right?
Yes.
Leftpad is an example of that. I think this one is a separate issue, because I think this is an issue where a guy open sourced something and then was like, I don't want to maintain this anymore. Random person X volunteers, and he goes, yeah, that's great. I mean, I don't have to worry about it anymore. And there's not much you can do about that.
No, and then the random dude added a malicious dependency.
But the issue there is, I guess, is that you're in this situation where it's so easy to bring things in, and the transitive dependencies is such a mess that you have no idea when you're building a project what packages you're actively using, right?
So npm is a command line thing, like a package manager. So you have npm installed on your machine, and then the command line you run like npm install, and then it looks in a particular file and downloads all that stuff. But npm is also a website where people can publish their packages, and the two things work together. So you can run I think it's like npm publish to publish a package. And so I'm sure other people had things like that, but basically, and I'm sure they must have copied what a lot of other people had done in other package managers, but they made something which made it very easy to publish packages. And then I guess as a result of that, people have published all sorts of random and wonderful packages and then depended on them. And when you depend on something, you end up depending on a lot of other things, and you don't really actually know what open source software you know what things you're depending on directly.
Yeah.
But the transitive dependencies, the things that those things depend on, you've got no clue. And so on Tuesday when I came into work, I ran a yarn on npm install or a yarn install on my project. It just didn't work because npm had deleted this malicious package, and I was dependent on it, but I had no idea. And then I Googled it, found GitHub. And
how far down your transitive dependencies was that dependency?
At least 3.
Right.
So it wasn't a direct depend, because it was, so I don't depend on Event Stream, is it called? Don't depend on that directly.
Yeah.
So it's something which depends on that, and it could be too deep. So
yeah, I think it's like, so I know, having used Maven and published stuff to Maven Central, which is the Java equivalent.
Yeah.
I guess the biggest issue to doing that, or the biggest blocker, is you have to use GPG. You have to cryptographically sign every package.
Yeah, so I guess with npm
you don't, right?
You log into their site, and then you're logged in as your user. So they've basically done that like in the cloud.
But you could just register as a made-up person. Right?
Yeah, you could. And there's no. Yeah,
and to be fair, you can do that with GPG. I mean, there's no authentication with GPG. But all it's telling is the person who set up the Maven package. You're just saying, I'm definitely that person. Yeah. That's all you can say, right?
Yeah.
So nobody can publish something on your behalf. But I guess you couldn't do that in npm either, right? Because you have to. Well, unless I give you my login details, you can't do it, right?
You can transfer a package to another user, I think, which is what happened in this case, I think. So it's. But yeah, no, it's a very good package manager in general. It does have some issues, but it makes publishing packages very easy. It makes consuming them very easy. The website is I've got a couple of things that annoy me about it, but it's compared to like the competition is not strong on this count. If you look at like Maven repositories, they're a disaster in comparison to NPM.
But why? I personally don't see anything wrong with Maven.
I haven't looked at it for many years, but like, does it have? So like,
but what do you like about the NPM manager apart from the fact you can do npm install?
So you can search for packages on npm's. So npm's website's pretty good,
right?
As a package manager website compared to like Maven's website, it's like I'm thinking of the thing is it's not completely fair because I'm thinking of Maven from like 4 or 5 years ago.
I don't know if it's changed that much in that time.
So you can search for the packages. You tend to be able to find them pretty easily, and then the package pages themselves look pretty nice. And then the readme.md goes on that page, so you can see like the instructions for installing it or whatever it is the developers put. And then there's a link to the GitHub there by default, so you can orbit bucket, I guess, you can go to the repo, and it's all just there. You can see what the latest version is. You can't see what the previous versions are, which I find very irritating. But and there's no links to like the release notes. So there's like things they could definitely like make a bit better. But it's just easy and quite straightforward. I'm trying to think. I mean, the other thing with NPM as well is it's kind of a build system as well, which a lot of these tools like Maven and Gradle are the same. They're kind of a dependency management system, but they also let you...
They have plugins, right?
They sort of have... Yeah, in Maven terms, they have plugins, and NPM has the concept of a script where you can say, I'm going to be able to run NPM run something, and then you can basically run any kind of bash commands, I suppose, or whatever terminal you have, you can run those things there. And that's so when your buddy checks out your project, there'll be something called like npm run start, and that will do whatever needs to get done to like run the things. It's just in terms of developer friendliness, it's very good. Like I haven't used anything that's close to how good it is. It supports modules which are also binary executables. So I'm trying to think of a good Prettier, we were talking about last week. That's a binary executable. So you can npm install it globally, and then you can run Prettier.
Yeah.
But you can also npm install it in your project, and then there's a special folder which is like node_modules/.bin, and all the binaries for your project are in that folder. And when you are programming in the npm scripts, you can just say Prettier in there, and it will automatically look in that .bin folder. It's kind of appended to the end of the path when you're running like npm stuff.
Yeah.
So you've also got like, you can get like build tools like Prettier or linters or things to build code or watch things. You can get all of those as well with it, and you know that when someone else checks out the project, they can run npm install. They'll get all the same versions, in quotes, kind of. They'll get similar versions, but there are versions listed, and depending what you say, they'll get all the same stuff, download it all, and it should just all work, which is a dream, and it is pretty reliable in general. If you've got the same node version, there's a really good chance, there's a really good probability of it working. Whereas some of these other things, it's kind of, and having executable things is really handy as well.
Yeah, I was going to say that's something that definitely you're not going to do. Well, I guess you could do with Maven if you wanted to, but I don't know why you would.
It's not set up for that, really.
No, and I think that is nice. Yeah, because whenever you're using something like Maven, I guess the C# one's similar. They need to have explicitly added support for Maven or that build tool, right? To be like, okay, as part of your package stage or whatever they call it, run these sort of pre-run, post-run things, and it can get quite complicated.
So like an example of a language which I like that has a package manager that I have yet to really get to grips with, maybe someone can educate me, is Python. So Python has you can create a file, but the default, I know there are other extensions to the package manager. So the package manager is called pip, PIP, and then you can save all your dependencies into requirements.txt.
Yes.
But by default, pip is like used in a global manner, which, especially given the people that generally use in Python for data science, especially, which is one of the most common use cases, are not what I would call, they're not sort of hardcore programmers. They're, the npm way where you're like, well, if you run npm install, it will just look for this file by, this package.json file, and it will install what's ever in there. Python is like, you need to run pip and then pass that file as a parameter. That just seems mental. But
Yeah.
I know there are other things, but there's
And they'll install globally then as well, right?
Yeah. So if you have two projects which need different versions of a thing, like your kind of whole machine, you're just upgrading all these things, and like one project's going to break when another one. That's just mental.
Yeah.
So I mean, people will probably say, "Oh, Python has this other third-party thing," but like in Node and npm, it's the default. So you want packages with JavaScript, you're going to use npm or Yarn, and Yarn is just really a lightweight wrapper around npm from what I've seen that's a bit faster and has some extra caching, but it's not fundamentally a different package manager. It's more or less the same.
It's a different tool on top of the same source, right?
Yeah. So it uses the same repository.
Yeah.
So it uses the same back-end infrastructure. It's basically like the binary. I don't know. Actually, I think this is probably actually incorrect, but the way I think of it is the binary, the npm thing you download and run npm on the command line. Yarn is another one of those.
Yeah.
I think there is a little bit of back-end infrastructure, but I know they're still getting the packages from npm. So whether they've mirrored npm but it's basically still npm, and you're still looking at npm.com for your packages. And they added a .lock file to lock down which specific versions of things you were using after they were all resolved, which RubyGems had originally, which was a really good feature. But then it's...
As in you don't specify the version ahead of time.
So you specify the version in the package.json still.
Yeah.
And then the .lock file is like a much more granular version of like what versions everything's are. I actually don't completely understand what it's for, but I think you can get all the packages from the .lock file.
Right.
So it's kind of...
Because the problem, or maybe it was an initial problem when it was early stages of NPM, but the way it would default to saying, whenever you picked a package, it would generally say like something like, just give me the latest or latest within a patch release or something. And then you get this weird,
symbols.
Those symbols are...
There's a hat and a tilde. I get a bit confused.
But then I thought that was really annoying, but I've got a sneaky suspicion that Maven has the same set of symbols. You just never use them.
Yeah.
Because in Maven, you'd always be like, I want version X. But in NPM, it seemed to be anyway that it used to be anyway that it would be like, oh, well, you sort of want just major version 2 and actually we'll give you any minor version, which I think was part of the complexity around the dependencies, right? Is that you're not actually hard coding the specific version that you want.
You can.
Yeah, I think you can.
But by default, so there's instructions to add things, to install and simultaneously add them to the package.json file, which Yarn has So Yarn has made that by default as the design decision. So it's very difficult in Yarn to install things globally and not just get them in your package.json, which is what you almost always want, because you want your buddy to check out the project for things to work. So the default commands in Yarn add it, and there are special commands in npm you have to add some extra flags. But Yarn's been amazing because it's basically lit a fire under them, and I think they've got a bit complacent and they've started adding all these features, and then npm are lagging, but they're adding them too. So npm's getting better because Facebook have built Yarn. So that's really cool. But yeah, I think you can specify exact versions.
But why would you ever not specify exact versions? Because I think all of these issues that are occurring is because people aren't doing that, right?
Yeah, I guess if they were locking in specific versions, then this wouldn't have happened. Yeah. But I guess by default, it's probably, if you lock in a specific version versus saying, I'll allow the latest minor. So in what's it called? Semantic versioning, which is where you have major, minor, patch.
Yeah.
So like 1.1.1. You can say that last, the patch, so the last .1, you can say, if there's a .2 released, I'll take that.
That relies explicitly on the person on the other side, A, knowing what Semver is, and then B, doing it properly.
And a lot of npm modules are pretty bad with they release patch releases. They don't follow Semver basically. I'm not a library developer. I'm what I call an application developer. So it's quite rare that I'll actually release a library, but I do vaguely understand what Semver is, and I know that they shouldn't be releasing patch versions if they're making breaking changes, and I know that they do sometimes do that.
I've read about this somewhere else. I can't remember where I've read about it, but it's basically saying it's making that differentiation. And as somebody as an application developer, you sort of have free reign to do what you want because it's only you that you're affecting. But at the point where you have a library or a framework that you're making available to other people, that's actually quite a big responsibility. And part of the reason, coming back to this event stream issue, that I think it became, for this guy, whoever he is, it just became too much for him. He's like, I don't want to maintain this anymore. Because to do it properly, I think actually takes a lot of time. You've got to be like, follow Semver is is a 101 for me. Like you can't release anything if you're not going to follow that. As a library, obviously as an application, you're free to do whatever you want. But I think it feels like some of it in the JavaScript community is everybody trusting each other a bit too much.
Yes.
Whereas I think if you come in from with an enterprise mindset, you trust nobody.
It's I don't know what the mentality is, but there is an element of balls to the wall. It will just work. And if you're building prototypes, it's amazing. If you were building a thing in a bank, which you were like, this is never going to break, then it gives you a lot of rope to hang yourself with, and you'd need to have some practices that you implemented.
Yeah, and that's the point I was trying to make, right? Is that if coming from an enterprise standpoint into JavaScript, for me, I guess, because that's mainly where I've worked, although I have worked at startups, but taken that same mentality is that you're always coding very defensively. You're assuming that you can't necessarily trust that anything that you're using, people are doing it sensibly, right? So you've got to be like, right, I want version X of this, version Y of this, and I'm not changing anything until I know it's going to work.
Yeah.
For me, saying that there's a package manager that you're using where it might not take exactly the version that I've been developing against, for me is just reckless.
You could...
Now, I know you're saying Jan does do that correctly, which makes me a lot happier about it.
You can... Yeah, people were... In the aftermath of this event stream thing, people were saying, oh, well, when I upgrade packages, I diff like all the implications of that, which is something that I would never, ever do. Like, that's great. But I can imagine, actually, if you really wanted to get serious, that's probably what you need to do. You need to be like, right, we're upgrading a bunch of stuff. What codes change? What are we actually bringing in?
Well, I think there is... Look, I mean, I'm not saying that, okay, yeah, diffing everything is a little extreme, but all I'm saying is being pragmatic about, I'm running version 1.1.1 here. Do we want to switch to 1.1.2 for A, a bug fix, or B, some feature? Yes. Let's actually just explicitly switch it and test everything. If it doesn't compile with 1.12, then we stay on 1.1.1.
Yeah. There's a tool called Green Thumb, I think, which will detect NPM changes to repositories, upgrade them, run your build and test suite, see if everything works, and then does a PR and merges it automatically. So it's like it basically automates upgrading things, because otherwise...
But I still think you need a manual step there. Like, I think at the point where you'd say this is passes, then I'd be like, okay, that's great, I'll manually merge it.
This particular problem that happened, where this person basically put some dodgy code, like malicious code, in a library, would be difficult for any... I don't think I know of a mechanism in any of them to fix that. The problem with NPM that makes it worse is that there's so many transitive dependencies. There's so many... like, the number of dependencies in a project can get so much higher than anything else I've seen, because they're so... There is more of a focus increasingly on depending on things which don't have a high number of dependencies themselves to keep the transitive dependencies down. But that, like, I had no idea I was depending on this thing. Like, absolutely no idea. And I was probably depending on it more than once, actually, I reckon. But I'd be surprised.
If everyone was fixed on a fixed version, no one would ever have got the broken version, right? Until they explicitly upgraded.
Yeah, I don't know why... I don't know exactly how it works and why that's happened. Because...
But the problem is the entire... Like, you could be like, tomorrow, right, me as Richard, I'm going to... like I'm trying to argue here, right? I'm just going to hard code all of my version numbers, and I'm never going to upgrade versions manually. But the problem is the way NPM has grown, every dependency you're depending on might have that, except any minor transitive dependency.
Well, I'm guessing that's what's happened in this case.
Yeah, exactly.
The event stream dependency had I'll just upgrade the patch version. He's released a dodgy patch version, and so then they've had. Yeah, and that's really hard, because what were developers supposed to do everywhere? Like, hard-coded particular patch version of this piece of this dependency they had no idea they were using, and you'd have a list of 10,000 things.
But that's what I'm saying. I think because of the way NPM started out, there are these thousands and thousands of libraries that are building up on this assumption that for example, patch version increases are okay, but actually, it probably shouldn't be like that, right? It should be everybody's hard coding to a particular version, and somebody somewhere has to make a conscious decision of the thing that you own to upgrade your dependencies.
Maybe they should just change the defaults.
Yeah.
I don't, because I think the default is just to accept patches.
Well, that's what I mean. And I think it's taking that ownership of who's responsible for those upgrades away from the library that you're using to yourself as the library owner.
So so basically, when you're working on modern JavaScript stuff, you would hopefully use npm for all your dependencies, so you can lock in the versions. Whereas the old way was kind of using script tags, which is not a good practice. That's like kind of crazy. But you would have like, you basically say, go load this script from this HTTP address, and I guess that it kind of.
So the reason that still is relevant, right, is that another big problem with JavaScript is that how would I describe this problem? Well, the big problem, I think we actually touched on it last week, and you're writing JavaScript, you're then converting your JavaScript into a different type of JavaScript, and then running that. So you're getting all these packages in, and then you're saying to this Webpack, build this all together into a different JavaScript, and then run that. And it's like you're using a language, you're writing in a language that then has to be converted into itself, but in a different representation.
Into an older version of itself.
Yeah. Well, into an older version, but then also including all these other libraries.
Yes.
And I think that's, the library system, in terms of adding functionality, I completely agree with. Like, you shouldn't be reinventing the wheel for 90% of stuff.
Yeah.
Do you need an is even package? Probably not.
No.
But I would imagine 95% of packages that you're going to include, there's a legitimate reason to saying I don't want to write whatever it is.
So maybe a fairer comparison, just to like come to its defense a little bit, is if you look at Node, which is probably really closer to something like C# or Java because it's server side. Actually, there now, if you're using the latest version, you'll get a very up-to-date version of JavaScript. And aside from one language feature, which is
the
quite
modules thing.
Importing.
I think you said that last week.
Yeah, importing. Aside from importing, you get pretty much everything that I would want. It's pretty modern. It's not got completely bleeding edge language features, but the problem was before that in 2015, the bleeding edge language features then were like really basic things that were in most other languages. Whereas now the bleeding edge, I'm like, I've not seen this feature before in another language, so I'm not really that bothered. So now all the, stuff like lambdas with arrow style lambdas, string interpolation, so you can have backticks and then put code in the middle of a string, like really handy, useful, like ... operators in like a number of places to help with like objects and arrays. It's really good. That's all just in, except for import. So in Node, you basically don't really have a reason to recompile the code except for this import thing.
So how come importing is such a key thing? How is that not a solved problem?
I have read, because this has been bothering me for about a year and a half, and it's actually been a while. Everybody in the community is basically using import, more or less. And yeah, it's not native in Node, which is crazy. And it's been built in as an experimental feature for, I think, 3 versions in a row, and it's not yet non-experimental. I'm now using it, not in production, and it's been fine. But you have to suffix the files with .mjs instead of .js. And it's something which I did read about. Apparently, it's quite complicated to do with the 2 types of files are very separate, and so it needs to really understand, like, these ones are modular files that are going to use import export, and these ones require, and you can't mix the syntax at all. So you can't do a require and an import in the same file.
Right.
So you have 2 different sets of files. You can import a require style file from an import file and vice versa, though. But yeah, they haven't added it by default, whereas I kind of feel that at some point they're going to need to just bite the bullet, because clearly this new syntax is a bit better.
But clearly importing is a key feature that it's been missing since require.js existed about 8 years ago.
Well, requiring and import are kind of the same thing. So
that's what I mean. But it's not a new thing that you're importing external libraries, right? This has been a problem for a long time, and the first solutions to those were Babel and now Webpack, right?
Yeah. So,
but I just it seems difficult to me to understand why that hasn't been a primary focus. I guess because you were saying such basic language features were missing, they've prioritized those first, I guess.
Yeah, I think this one's hard. I think that's because they've had it in the same way for since Node 9, and they've now released 11.
Right.
So there's a flag --experimental -modules, which will just basically make it all work. But it's the fact that it's under that flag means that you can't really use it with like client work and be like, why did it all break?
It's strange coming from, I guess it's a different type of language. It's hard. I mean, actually, I know a lot of people won't know KDB. But I feel it is unfair comparing it to something like Java, because a lot of this really basic stuff is just a given. But that's also because it's a compiled language, and a lot of the way JavaScript seems to have got around its problems is by turning itself into a compiled language, even though it's just compiling into the same language.
So the way, this was something I definitely wanted to talk about. The history, I don't actually know the history super well, but it seems to have evolved. JavaScript. So JavaScript was like, back in the day, was like the programming language of the web. So you could do it in a browser. And there was like, I don't know what versions it went through, and it was kind of a bit crap because apparently it was made in like 3 days. And it was, to be honest, as like a proper engineer in inverted commas, it was a bit rubbish, and was quite rubbish until like 2010 or 11 and 12. And then I think, I'm not sure what spawned it, but because the web is obviously such a big deal, and people at Google and Facebook and everywhere else were like, there was no getting away from it, because, you know, Google built a website, as to Facebook. It's like part of their primary products, multi-billion-dollar businesses. How can we not make this rubbish? And so a bunch of smart people set about being like, what language features do we, if we're going to have to use this thing, which we will, because of where it is, because it's the only way you can run code on a website, which is something which you obviously need to do to build interactive things like Facebook, and to some degree you kind of don't need it for Google, although they obviously do use it a lot. So what they did was they started changing the language really aggressively with this ES6, ES7, so proposed standards, and then compiling the proposed standards back to the old supported version. And in general, the old supported version is normally called ES5, so like I don't know if it's the 5th version, but whatever it is. And the ES6 was the one that had most of the new features, and then there's like a 7, but there's kind of a bunch of stuff since ES5. And so they iterated on the language like really aggressively compared to like Java or most other, or even Python. Like Python 2 to 3 has taken, feels like a decade. These guys were like, we're just changing this. And they didn't have to ask permission. They were like, this is what we propose as a smart group of individuals, and we're just going to compile it backwards. So we don't even need, you know, IE or Chrome to agree with us. And it allowed them basically as a community to move forward with it. They haven't made many missteps. There's not many things they've taken in and then taken out that I've seen. So I think their roadmap was pretty solid actually, but they did it quickly.
But I guess as well, it goes to show, I mean, I actually didn't know that initial history, but it goes to show what happens if you just make up a language without really thinking about it.
Well, initially,
yeah.
Oh yeah, like it was poor.
And I guess you still have a lot of those jokes that you see are off the back of those original features that you can't get rid of, right? Like false, equal, null, or whatever.
There's a lot of like legacy of like stupid things, and I guess a linter sorts you out because it's like, just don't do that. Yeah. But and in general, yeah, they've added things like having constants so that, you know, you can't mutate variables, and they've added nice function syntax. Async await and promises are like a really nice addition for like asynchronous style things. And the other thing that's really interesting about JavaScript, I mean, not necessarily the view of the BBC, but the standard library is basically non-existent / terrible. And
yes,
from like circa 2000, and I mean, even now, I would say actually it's lacking compared to like what I've seen in Ruby standard library is pretty awesome. Python's is definitely better. Node's libraries are actually okay, but it's in the browser, like the collections libraries, so the equivalent of, I know Java now has a lot of this stuff. C# has it with Link.
Yeah, I think Go has the stream stuff.
Yeah, and Ruby has a really good standard library, and JavaScript basically doesn't have much. They added map, so you can take an array and then map over it with a function. But like what that meant was that rather than a bunch of dodgy language people making one decision, so you get sort of like I don't know what you call that, but like a dictatorship of like this committee deciding. What happened is that people just started making libraries and putting them on NPM, well, not NPM at that time, but putting them on GitHub, and people were just scripting them. And so there was like loads of natural competition. And then that eventually led to Underscore, which was then sort of surpassed by Lodash, which is one of the best standard libraries that I've ever worked with. It's really nice, but it's weird because it's not built in. So you're kind of like, why have we got this? But that's happened with a lot of things in JavaScript. There's not a native date thing. There's basic date support is basically non-existent.
Yeah.
So someone's built this thing called Moment, which deals with dates, which is again probably, in my opinion, in terms of like ease of use, like it's world class good. This for dates, it's really good.
Yeah, I have used Moment actually.
It's really nice and easy compared to. I've used like a little bit of like Yoda time in Java, Yoda time, I don't know what you call it.
Yeah, so that's interesting, right? I was just thinking about it. I know we're not specifically talking about Java, but again, because I don't think it's actually a fair comparison. But since the big push on JavaScript, Java also seems to have come a long way. And it's interesting that I'd have to look exactly at the dates, but it feels almost like they've happened at the same time. So obviously, I think we joked in the last episode about how we started university on Java 6 and we finished university 4 years later in Java 6. And Java 7 was out for ages, and then 8 has been the standard for the last, for 2 or 3 years. And now we're iterating quite quickly through 9, 10, and 11. And there's lots of new features coming out in each one of those.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was it's interesting that they seem to have somehow it's almost too good it's almost too big a coincidence that the acceleration of the development of one sort of mainstream language has led to rapid development of another language as well. But what they've also done, just on that point that you just said there, they've actually taken in these libraries in Java. So, for example, Yoda time, they have basically just copied that API and brought it internal, so it's now native.
Oh, that's great.
The streaming stuff they did as well, because I think I used Google Guava before that, and all the good bits out of that, like predicates and filters and stuff, basically to make it like link. Mm-hmm. They've just taken that internally, and it's all just native. And it's strange that that's just suddenly happened, because for so long nothing happened. I don't know whether people just thought language development was a bit dull.
So what I think's strange about JavaScript that makes some of that stuff that Java's done impossible is the fact that I don't even want to guess 5 billion people on Earth have this programming language installed on their computer in a browser. And so changing things is a different ball game to like if Java are like, we're going to release a new version, and I don't know how many 2 million software engineers in the world are going to download it if they want to optionally, and they want to go to Java 12 or whatever it is. So it's kind of those constraints have meant that packages that like third-party dependencies have been the way forward, because it's hard for them to change. They have done it, to be fair, and Chrome has pushed it forward. But even now, if you want to support like IE11, which is relatively recent, really, like so many things that are standard in ES6 that we've been using for 3 or 4 years still don't run.
Yeah.
So you're still going to need to transpile your code for the browser for the foreseeable future, and I think that's.
It's surprising, actually. I mean, Google tried, right? Actually, I was thinking about, you said Chrome there, and obviously now it's such a big deal. I was thinking, it's interesting that they didn't try and change it, and they did, of course, but it didn't go anywhere, which was Dart. Was their JavaScript replacement.
Yeah. I was looking in that State of JS 2018, which we can link to, but Dart is like very unpopular in that list. It's right down the bottom. Yeah.
It never really did anything. And it's interesting then that it stayed. And I guess enough people are working on it that there's been a drive to make it better. And I think at the point where it's not, this transpiling goes away, and that you can just natively include modules, I guess there's always going to be some sort of bundling. You can't get away from that. But
browsing,
and I mean,
Node, it should go. They're taking their sweet time, but in 2 years we'll be sat here, and I think there'll be no. I'm already working on projects now that have no transpiling in Node, and it sounds really stupid, but it's wonderful. But obviously, it's standard in almost every other language.
Yeah.
You either compile it using the stock compiler, or you just run it if it's scripted like a dynamic language. But
so how do you feel on JavaScript in the browser versus JavaScript in Node? For you, are they one and the same? Do you behave any differently in either of them, or
no? Which is also pretty awesome. If you are that way inclined, you can use exactly the same flavor. So like ES6, and when I was training developers, like you'd finish training them in the browser, and then you'd be like, right, we're going to write some Node, and all it really is there are some additional APIs which you can't access in the browser, but all of the code is basically this, like, you've got access to like sockets and other file system and stuff, but just the same code, and the language, the latest version of the language is like it's had a lot of attention. The reason I like this ecosystem is that a lot of smart people have clearly spent a lot of time making it better, and it has a critical mass that I've not seen. Ruby on Rails had this same effect. They're the only two things that I've witnessed. Obviously, I've only been programming for I only went pro 8 years ago, so I don't know beforehand. Perhaps there have been other things, but it's just kind of like, if you want to do a thing in JavaScript, you will Google the thing. Someone else will have already done it, and there'll probably be a module with a lot of dependencies, but there'll probably be a module, and you can just download and use that. So you spend if you actually just want to be productive and get stuff done, it's a pretty good place to be, because you're just kind of like, someone else will have already done it, because so many hundreds of thousands of developers, millions of developers, I assume, are using it. The ecosystem's massive. Google and Facebook have funneled, especially Facebook, have had a pretty profound effect on it. They must have invested millions in some of the things. Because with React, they also have pushed they've got some really top developers working on React that are earning. I mean, how good someone is at their job is not necessarily directly correlated to how much money they earn, but I think it's a pretty good signal. And these guys, I think, are probably earning like over $200,000 a year, I assume, in the Valley. And like, they're basically, they were like, we're going to build React, but then they also pushed the direction of JavaScript, so away from things like Require.js and towards something called Browserify, which then sort of is Webpack, and they kind of how importing modules was going to be managed on the web, and there's lots of other things like that they've done, where you're kind of like, these guys have like pushed it in a really positive direction, and there's so much competition between all these modules that the modules that win out, I mean, we're kind of past the point where they're all fighting now, but like, you have like, there's healthy competition basically, because there's so many people doing it, there's so much competition, and then competition's making better libraries, which, and as a developer, basically, I don't think there's anything you can work with that will give you such a good experience, and like so many libraries you can use, because presumably there were competitors to Lodash and Underscore beforehand, and they all lost, and those ones won, and they're really good. And Moment the same, and there are some losers, but the winners are amazing. And it's kind of, there are lots of problems with it though as well. The learning curve for new developers, because of this rapid period of change, is still, if you were just coming into it, you're going to get lost. And it's even when I started as like someone that had been developing in lots of proper engineering kind of back-end languages, it was overwhelming, the number of different libraries and things, and the build system felt like it was changing every other week. And
it was, wasn't it?
It was, and it's, and to some degree, the amount of change. I think, coming back to what you said, there's basically been a bit of a mentality shift in this community, which perhaps it sounds like, I didn't realize Java was releasing things more regularly, but Node is released relentlessly. It's released, I think, every 6 months. New version, like clockwork. And they went through a period. At some point, they weren't doing what the community thought, so they forked it aggressively, and they were like, "We're adding all these features because you guys you're messing it up." And so then they were it's called IO.js. It was about 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah, I remember hearing about that.
They just released version after version after version until the Node guys were like, "All right, okay, we'll go with your fork and we'll actually do all this stuff." And it's just sort of, it's pushed it along, and I feel like we're through most of that now. Now I wouldn't say it's like, it's still quick. They're still releasing things at a fair old clip, but they've kind of got it to a good place, and maybe it'll be easier for new people to learn. Maybe.
I guess the next big problem is having a nice IDE. I think we talked about that. And obviously, circling back, what we talked about last week is still, that bit's quite hard, I guess.
A lot of people use TypeScript, which is
it's a different language, I guess.
Different language, but
typed.
It's typed, and therefore has a decent IDE with all the sort of support that you would want.
I mean, I guess that's another concern, I guess, or weakness potentially of JavaScript, is the lack of type.
Yeah.
Or the lack of strict typing.
Yeah.
Do you think that gets in your way? I assume you just deal with it, but do you think it would be nicer if it did have strict typing?
I think it depends who you are. So for me, in my old age, I'm quite pragmatic, and I tend to do a particular type of development now, which tends to be making things work for people quite quickly. So kind of in a more startup-y than an enterprisey kind of a way. And for that, TypeScript, I don't think would offer me that much. If I was working in like a big organization and you wanted to be damn sure everything was going to work, then maybe TypeScript, then it just comes down to like, do you want a typed language versus a dynamic one? And I think probably certain things are better for certain jobs. There's definitely an overhead to TypeScript. I've used it a bit and I've seen other people using it. When you import other libraries, you need to make sure you've got the types. And if you don't, then it's like, you have to cast everything all the time, and like I'm sure a lot of TypeScript people will be like, oh no, it's fine. But like there'll be that module you want to use that's like just doesn't have the types, and then you're kind of stuffed.
I've seen that. Yeah.
You've got to add the types yourself, which I mean, it's like, and you can argue, I just had the types myself. Well, that's one thing that I do not have to do because I don't have types. So it's kind of like, and it's also like when you're using lots of little things, you'll look at a code sample in pure JS and you can just copy paste it. If you're in TypeScript, you've got to basically convert that bad boy. And really what I'm going for is the path of least resistance with the most people. It's kind of like critical mass is the phrase I would use. You're kind of just on the bandwagon with everyone else. And there are some downsides to that, but there are also some really big upsides because, you know, if you want a library and you want it to work, it's probably going to work with regular JS and maybe it will work with TypeScript. So you kind of just like...
But in terms of maintainability, you're losing something, right, by not having types.
You definitely are. And you can get a few more bugs for sure. Like you can always get... Linting kind of helps with some things, but yeah. And maybe that will mean you have to write more tests if you're that way inclined. I think where perhaps it gets a little bit more difficult is if you said to me, you need to write all your server-side code in Node, which I think is something that you would probably really not want to do. But...
No, I probably wouldn't know.
No, but I think...
I appreciate the benefit if you are somebody who writes JavaScript. I mean, it's an obvious... you don't have to learn another language, right? Which is great.
I mean, you can also share code. And which is pretty cool. I mean...
I guess it's practically how much code do you end up sharing.
Yeah, sometimes some. You can... Yeah, I think server-side Node code is maybe a little bit more... It depends how much you're writing, and it depends on the task at hand. There are some things that Node is not as good at as something like Java or C#. But if you're writing something small, it's definitely fine. But the lack of typing and server-side bothers me more for some reason.
Yeah, so just to be clear, KDB is the same as JavaScript. It's dynamically typed.
So you work dynamically typed day-to-day too?
You can type certain things, but you don't have to.
Yeah.
So, like, you don't define types of function arguments or function return. You don't define types of internal variables. They just get a type. The only thing you do type is data structures, so tables, which is the main thing you use. You can type columns.
Yeah.
But you don't. So, I mean, you have more types than JavaScript does. So you actually have int, long, decimal, symbol, string. Again, we can go into all that, but you have a lot more. You have a few more types than you do natively in JavaScript, I guess. But it's the same, and it bothers me the same way I think you just described on the server side. Is the lack of types. You get into a problem where, well, particularly in KDB, where you just get an exception that just says type because the type didn't line up, and it is a problem. And you've got to. And then it's your call, right? Do you defensively code around that lack of typing? So, like, for me, public functions in a library, for example, some of the stuff I've open sourced, if I need it to be a specific type, the first lines are, is the type what I'm expecting? And if it isn't, I'm going to throw an exception. Yeah. And I guess that's a personal call then, right?
I think type versus static, type versus dynamic is a classic engineering trade-off in most cases for me. It's like, is one better than the other? Depends on what you're doing. Depends on, like, I think in general though, some people, I'm much more comfortable. I mean, before my last perm job, I was at work in a financial institution that had a lot of important code in Ruby, which is obviously dynamic, and they were pretty happy. And to be honest, in terms of like dysfunctional code workplaces, I'd come from Java, and this was way more, like things broke far less often. And they were very talented, quite highly paid developers that were doing a good job. So I guess it kind of depends on. I think dynamic in general gives you more rope to hang yourself.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
It protects you a little bit less. So it kind of depends on what you're writing and how much you care about protecting yourself, and also the kind of programmer you are. And
because I think the way I get around I think the not the limitations, the dynamicness of, say, KDB or JavaScript is I just code very defensively to counteract that.
I code quite defensively, but usually not on types. Actually, I kind of just I'm not saying everywhere I'm checking the type of a thing. I do. Yeah, I'm quite aggressive. So I really like guards in functions. So like where you start a function and then you say, like, if this bad thing that I never thought would happen, then I'll throw something or just return. Just you kind of just opt out. It's like, what do they call it at uni? Invariance, isn't it? That you like. I think that's what they call it. But like where you just sort of say, no, I'm out. Stop.
Yeah.
So I do that a lot, and I use a lot. Lodash has some really good functions to keep things null safe. So like you can like, if you want to do this dot that, you can do that in a way that if like none of that stuff's there, you won't get a null pointer. It'll just return you like null or undefined or something. So I do a lot of that.
Yeah, I guess that's the way I do it as well. Actually, is that I will, I'll just return. I'll just bail out if something isn't how I'm expecting. I mean, in Java, for example, a good one to use against that is string, right? Because you can get a null string, an empty string, or a string with some content in. So if it's null or empty, you just go away, or just return empty string back or something. You know what I mean? It's that sort of guard. It's the same, I guess.
Yeah, it's kind of the same. You kind of know it's going to be a string, but then it could be null. In which case, so you do get some of the protect. I know some languages have like question marks to say like this thing can or can't be nullable, which is quite a nice feature. But it's basically just saving you that if at the beginning.
Yeah, I guess if you could just not have null. A lot of issues. I think you'd have a lot less issues.
TypeScript has that. So if you don't say question mark,
it can't be null.
It can't be null.
Yeah, which is what it then checks in the compiler, right?
Yeah. But then, I think I don't think it bothers me too much though.
No, I'm coming from the side of making you defend JavaScript, but there are a lot of similarities to the language I spend my days in as well. So A interpreted, B dynamically typed, so and C, actually something you mentioned before, no standard library. So I feel the pain that you're saying, and I don't have an ecosystem to use, so
no,
I lose out as well.
Yeah, because I think that's the thing with JavaScript is it is the most. Once you become proficient with it, I think it is as productive or possibly the most productive thing for building. Maybe not all types of applications, but certainly, obviously, websites, but like web stuff. I think even Node, if you want to get something going, if you want to build like a HTTP server, you can get that going in Node in like seconds. Well, if you've done it before, especially, or if it's not swathes of code, it's just a little bit of code. And the thing I really like about JavaScript compared to like Ruby on Rails is there's not any magic. Ruby on Rails is quite magic oriented, so there's a lot of convention based stuff.
Yes.
So it's like, which is, to be fair, that's not Ruby, that's Ruby on Rails, in fairness. But it's kind of, but really, I think it's still the case. Ruby doesn't get used that much in isolation. Ruby on Rails is like, probably most Ruby projects are Ruby on Rails projects. But they basically had folders for certain things. And then if you had a file in there, that it knows what that means. So then you're not saying all this other code. Node's very, I can't remember the word, it may be declarative, but you always say what you want it to do.
Yeah.
And you can read the program from start to finish. And
which I think makes a lot more sense. I think that the magic way is it's coming into a project like that. You're like, I have no idea how this links together. Whereas at least, I don't know if you still use Express or something then you've got all your roots and everything and functions that are executing off the back of that in one file, right?
The program starts on line 1, and by the time you get to line 30, you can see what it's done, which I think is like,
I think there's a lot to be said for that.
I think so too. That's like Java had the same problem with like Spring. It's kind of like that, and I think now there's a lot of the new Spring stuff is like, look, we're just going to call some code to do some stuff. But I think where JavaScript is really good on the lack of typing is it's really because JSON and JavaScript are very related. If you're handling JSON, which also happens to be partially because it's the webby sort of stuff. It's very common for APIs. Parsing JSON in JavaScript is like a dream because you can just, there's a function for it and then you've got it in a JavaScript object and it's just done. Whereas I used to spend a lot of time in typed languages being like, right, I need to define a class which has the same fields that the JSON's going to have so that I can read this thing in. I know you can do it in a more dynamic way in...
Yeah, maybe you didn't used to be able to, but yeah, I think Google's JSON, they have a Java JSON parser. I think you can just be like get field, basically.
Oh, yeah, which is much easier.
Yeah, but again, those are relatively new.
Yeah, so like I think... it's pretty strong. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that we've missed. But I really just like it because of the critical mass thing, and because of the number of libraries and the state of there has, going back to what you said about Java, there obviously has been a bit of a change in certain groups of developers with releasing things really regularly. The way they release React is fascinating and different to anything that I don't know if anything that came before it, but basically they've never really done a big breaking release. They do lots of they increment the middle number. What's that? Major, minor. They're on 0.17 now, and they never. Whereas what Angular did, they went from Angular 1 to Angular, so like 1.0 whatever to 2. React is just, they'll break like one or two things, and they don't really break that much. They normally just add features, but it is technically a breaking change. So they're like, oh, we'll put this on a minor, and they just release it quite regularly. So as a person that's consuming their library, you've got sort of bite-sized upgrades that you can consume rather than like a rewrite. And I think actually, and React Native is released, they're on a number over 50, probably taking it too far. React is done brilliantly. Like, you can upgrade a version of React and 9 times out of 10 nothing will break, even in a really big code base, because they really think about it. And
well, I think that's what you mentioned Angular there. I think that's what killed Angular off, wasn't it?
Yeah,
they basically said, we've done it, we want to completely change it, and no one came with them. Basically,
they played it poorly in like game theory wise. What they should have done was not told anyone they were working on the bloody new version, and then everyone would have just carried on using it. But then they said, we're doing 2, and then they took ages to get it out.
And they explicitly said it would not be backwards.
So everybody knew, do we start a new project with like a beta version which isn't finished, or do we use, and this was like maybe for a year and a half, or do we use the old version and then
do we go somewhere else?
React. And React, I think, just because React in that time were just doing sensible little upgrades, and there's an obvious upgrade path. You kind of feel safe that they're not going to like nuke you, but there's Node's the same. There's a culture of like, we're going to release things quite rapidly and be quite aggressive with releasing.
And that for some reason or somehow has then affected some of the older people, like Java.
Yeah,
are now releasing every 6 months, I think. Or so we're on 11 now, I think, and 12 is about to come out soon, I think. So it's like there's some things happened where maybe just because of like maybe it's some of this excitement or interest in these newer languages like JavaScript and these associated libraries that's just sort of rubbed off on people. Yeah. And they're like, why don't we just add streaming operations to Java and just be done with it? Why don't we add a read line, an interactive shell to Java? Let's just do it, and then it's done. And it's interesting that I don't know how. I don't know what what
spawned that.
Yeah. But I think it's. To be honest with you, it's good for everybody.
Yeah. I think,
and for every developer.
As a developer, it's like you want to I think small regular upgrades are just more convenient. Yeah. Like when you're telling your boss, "Oh, we need to upgrade this library," he or she does not give 2 hoots. Like what. They don't want to, all the customers that I do work for, if I said to them, oh, sorry, Dave, we need to spend 2 weeks upgrading React version, they're going to be like, what's that? They have a website that they want to work. So, smaller upgrades just give you that confidence. Like, I can, we don't need to upgrade React. And when we do, there'll be a sequence of small steps that we can follow. It's not going to be massively breaking. It's kind of in the middle, like they're breaking bits and they're making significant progress. But they're not kind of, they're not they're not kind of making massive breaking changes, but they are making progress.
Which is how you ended up in the enterprise world. Is Java apps stuck on Java 5 for 10 years.
Yeah.
Because people. They know that the upgrade's going to be a nightmare.
Yeah.
So they're just like, well, we just won't do it.
It's not worth it. And then you get all the costs associated with, we can't use this library because, React Native is probably, they were releasing that every 2 weeks, the minor version, which is the minor version, but it could almost be a major version. Lots of things would break. And so every 2 weeks, and that is a burden. But that project's an unusual project where there are other things moving that they don't control, like Xcode and Android. And so they're having to release versions because it's like, maybe you want your stuff to run on the latest version of iOS that's just come out, that Apple have just released. It's kind of like fair play, but yeah, that project is not governed as well. React is governed really well, and React Native is not governed as well, in my opinion.
Are they still owned and developed internally in Facebook?
Yeah, which is part of the problem. They've kind of half-heartedly open sourced it, whereas React is very open source, in my opinion.
It's still owned by Facebook.
But still, yeah, the license is good now.
Okay.
Open, don't know, MIT, I think.
Yeah.
But because it was a dodgy one, and then React, but it's all properly open source. But it's just the way that React Native's built. It's a more complicated endeavor, to be fair, because there's just more moving parts. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that we've not covered. Is there any other burning questions you've got for me, or I've got for you? Would you ever use it?
There are bits. Thing is, the way I use it now, even the way I use it now, is the same way I've used it, and that's not because I don't appreciate the way that you can develop things. It's just that I don't have the need to make anything more complicated than just a simple JavaScript file that gets natively interpreted. I have I think one open source project that basically is like a KDB code documentation viewer. So like JavaDoc, like the JavaDoc viewer for JavaDoc.
That's cool.
One of those for KDB basically, and that's just a simple JavaScript file that JavaScript website that just loads data from the KDB process. So I appreciate it. I just don't really I think the problem with web development is the problem I've always had with development. I don't really care that much about the visuals of I'm not really that interested into website design because it means a lot of time worrying about how it looks. And my experience historically with layouts of that stuff is it's just a lot of effort. And I'm just I'm not that way inclined. I don't particularly enjoy it.
What you're trying to say is you're a developer's developer.
I'm just a developer.
It's funny when I was training people and they come in with no bias, they can't program at all. They start programming, and the first thing we would teach them is like HTML and CSS, so like all the sort of stuff you just mentioned, and then we would get them onto proper JavaScript. And then after about 6 months, they'd be doing some work, and they would just show, not all of them, but some of them would have that same attitude. And it's interesting, like, they become a developer, what I would call a developer's developer. They're like, CSS is just a waste of my time. Spend about 5 years trying to move something 3 pixels, and you're like, yep, we've all been there. Yeah. I think that I do a bit of both. I get a lot of satisfaction still out of building things visually, because I actually didn't start my career, although when I used to build C# front ends for people, I like that. I thought I can show my mum.
Yeah,
kind of
there is something to be said for that.
Show your girlfriend, show your wife, show your mum kind of thing, and say, look at this thing I built. And you get that sort of tangibility of like, it's in the real world. Whereas if you write some sort of daemon process that runs in a black terminal somewhere, down the pub, I can tell you, I wrote this heck of a program the other day, and it's spitting out log files as we speak, but it's kind of...
See, that's the kind of stuff I like. Yeah. But I've always been a lot more low level than you, I guess, and I think that's why I like. Some of the reason I like doing KDB, and some reason I like a lot of the sort of low level.
Yeah, we are quite
networking and server stuff.
Yeah, we're quite different like that. Yeah, I am quite close to the highest level programmer I think you could be. Anything that's nitty gritty, I'm kind of like.
You didn't join me doing advanced computer architecture.
I did not. I know vaguely how processes work, but I kind of like, is it like a high level of abstraction? I just like to like, I don't want to have to think about pointers, and I want a language that I just want to think about solving real problems. And the thing that I really think JavaScript is strong at is like if you want to build, especially prototyping, but if you want to build a thing quite quickly and get it to market quickly, and that's your trade-off, that's the set of things you want, and maybe robustness. I'm not saying you couldn't write really robust. I'm sure you could, but you'd have to put more effort in. But if you want to build something really fast, because NPM is so strong, you're just going to go, well, I need this module and that module, and I've got React. And once you know what you're doing, you can the productivity I have in Node and JavaScript is so much higher than anything I've worked in before. And I have a history. I'm fickle. I'm a bit of a floozy with programming languages, and I didn't stick to one thing, and I actually took jobs because they had different things. And I've got stuck with JavaScript, and it may be because I've reached 30.
Yep, it's definitely got to be. And
I'm just gonna bat out the end of my career for the next 30 years using JavaScript, even when it becomes defunct. But I think it is because it just keeps me coming back. There's also quite a lot of change within it, which keeps it kind of fresh. Like it's different, very different 2 or 3 years ago from what it is now. So it's kind of changed anyway, and there are new libraries and new ideas, and a lot of the hotness is. I mean, for front ends.
I mean, I guess as well, the other benefit is that right now it's the way to, when you're talking about building new stuff that you're going to show, I mean, it's a website, right? There's no other, I guess React Native helps with that, but there's no, you don't need to be doing anything else to be able to build something to show to people, right? Or demonstrate or prototype.
No.
Unless you're doing some, like you say, some geeky back end thing that's, I don't know what you'd be doing, where you don't need any sort of visual output.
Yeah.
At that point, maybe you would consider something else, but maybe you wouldn't. But
I'm most likely to consider something else for server-side things.
Yeah.
So like Python for like data science, for like if I needed to have a lot of data in memory, or maybe I'd look at like Java or C#. And so I think it does depend. But
it maybe just be I'm just saying it might just be a product of the current situation of the environment.
Yeah.
Not in a wider sense.
There's been a trend as well where they used to call them fat GUIs, so like desktop applications built with like Java or C# have kind of gone out of favor, because actually the web has advanced so far that if you want to build an app which is on someone's desktop, like Slack, Spotify, these are like very rich applications. They're not built natively anymore. They're all actually built on the web and then just packaged up. And they all run in JavaScript, but just on your machine. And so it's kind of like
it gives you that cross-platform, right?
So basically, if you subscribe to React Native, which does have some, so React Native is basically React but for building apps, and you can kind of, although this is not necessarily true, build an application for iOS and Android with the same set of JavaScript code with some caveats, which we can talk about another day. And so you kind of got all types of UI in JavaScript if you use those.
Yeah.
I think the only other, you could make an argument for iOS and Android if you're a big company especially.
You might explicitly develop your phone apps natively.
Even Facebook haven't fully React Native, which I think says a lot. I mean, I know they have an app that like 3 billion people use, whatever it is, but I don't think they've moved WhatsApp.
Right.
So if you've got, and the thing is, if you're that big a company, hiring 2 full sets of teams and it's fine.
But when you're small, though, the benefits of React Native,
and that's where most of my work is. So it's kind of like, are we going to hire 2 sets of developers, or are we just going to get rich to build this thing? It's like
and again, I guess that's the state of the world at the moment, right?
Yeah, it's kind of, and there's nothing better for that. And that the other thing actually we haven't talked about is the fact that a lot of the libraries on the front end, but really in everything, lean towards functional programming, and that's another reason that it's been very sticky for me, because as you know, we started in Haskell as our first programming language.
We did. At
university, and I like functional programming, and you can program JavaScript quite naturally in a very functional way. The object-oriented support in even the latest version of JavaScript, I still think is quite weak. There you can't have, last I checked, you can't have private fields. So, I mean, that's pretty terrible in my book. That's poor. Like encapsulation out the window. So I think, maybe you can now, but there's lots of things where I tried to write classes in the way I would normally write classes, and then was like, oh, I can't do this thing. Oh, I can't. And I was working around things. Whereas functionally, functions are first-class citizens, so you can pass functions around. You can do all these awesome things. You can, There are like libraries to stop you from mutating things. There are inbuilt language constructs to clone things and therefore not mutate them. The spread operator.
Yeah.
And so, and the way that React and Redux works is very functional. And Redux is like a functional state machine where you have to use pure functions. And so that kind of keeps me interested in it because it's like you can.
I think the functional side of it is very interesting, and I think not being able to use functions as a native part of the language, like be able to pass them around and stuff, I think is a weakness of Java specifically.
Yeah, can you do it now? Maybe.
Well, you can do lambdas and stuff because they have the double colon.
Can't pass them.
I don't think you can.
You couldn't, but maybe.
Well, you can have. There's a function class.
C# you can though, so we can give it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have it for a long time. So they that's.
Yeah, so maybe just a specific issue with Java there, I guess. But yeah, it's and again, highly rateable with KDB because functions are a native member as well.
Once you get them as a native thing,
you don't really want to lose them.
No,
because being able to pass functions around is very nice.
It's it's one of those things that use with caution and use in certain scenarios. But yeah, it can be. There are certain patterns of programming which.
I guess for async programming in JavaScript, you need to be able to do that, right? Because you have to pass in callbacks. And that's why making it in Java is a pain in the arse. Because you're like, I want this thing this future or whatever it is, and you've got to pass in a runnable.
Yeah, and that's nuts.
And you're like, well, now I've got to build an anonymous inner runnable class with a run function, and it gets so messy.
It's something that JavaScript definitely has is it's not too verbose in general. I wouldn't say it's the most concise, but it's pretty good. It's a nice level. I don't feel like there's often a lot of rubbish in there. There's maybe some exceptions, but and async await as well has been done really well. Then they've clearly copied it from another language, but it's wonderful and it works pretty well. There are a lot of issues with JavaScript, and I think in like another 2 years, a lot of it is that daunting, I want to set up my first web project. How the hell do I compile my code? And there is not a particular... Webpack is a monster. And it's become...
It's a problem, right?
It feels like Git to me. I don't know if we talked about this last time, but Git... I'm so surprised that Git won the version control wars compared to all the other... Because it's pretty difficult. Like, it's not... Like, when we teach people to use Git, it's like they struggle for like months, and I don't feel like they're stupid. I'm like, no, it's pretty. There's a lot of different commands, and it doesn't, and it's one, and
I think there's probably worth a discussion about that separately, actually, on that. I get generally, and I think the reason it won was mainly because GitHub turned up.
Yeah,
I think.
I guess the Linux community massively embraced it because they made it because
but then I think like the Linux kernel community are. I mean, they feel quite isolated.
They're not trendsetters.
But you're not like talk. It's not like I was talking to that Linux kernel contributor and he was raving about Git.
To be fair, you could imagine that they'd have made Git, they'd still be using it in complete isolation.
Yeah,
just
not
middle
telling
finger
anybody
to the rest of the world. Yeah, and then exactly. They'd be like, oh, we're all using this other thing, and they're like, no, Linus made this thing, and he's God to us. So so it's kind of, it's probably.
But the only reason he wrote it right was because the tool they were using decided to start charging them. So Linus was like, sod this, I'll just write my own.
That's amazing.
So it came out of a legitimate problem.
There's like that urban myth that he wrote it in like a weekend.
Yeah.
I was reading about it. Apparently, he kind of did, but then.
Yeah, but he wrote like the really what he wrote in the weekend are like the really really basic ones, like there's like a command line argument that will generate like the git hash and like will build the tree. So like commit didn't exist and fetch and push didn't exist. It was just like update index or something and all that stuff. But anyway, we'll talk about it separately. But I thought it was interesting. It's interesting us talking about this because I think we both have this being JavaScript, because we definitely have very different opinions, and like you pointed out, we have different interests in computer science generally, right? Like you were saying,
we build different type of programs for a living.
Well, for a living as well, yeah. But even separately from that, like it's interesting. It's interesting to hear your side of it as you spend all day in it, trying to and the concerns I have basically coming off the back of that. So I think that is, it's still, I understand why you do it. I just don't think I would enjoy doing it.
We can convert you, yeah.
It's like a group of people outside that are kind of come in and
Yeah. Make you use NPM until your eyes bleed. Yeah, I think it's quite a friendly thing to use.
But it still doesn't. You have that problem where if you were going to be like starting from scratch,
starting from scratch is rubbish. And the React guys have put together. There's a thing called like React scripts and a few other things, which is basically like start here if you don't know what you're doing, and they have a webpack in them, but you don't really have to care. And it's basically like a very easy
it's like Spring Boot.
You kind of it's just the build bit. It's like this is how you're gonna like webpack and bundle up all your code.
It's that situation, right, where everyone heard of this thing that they need to use, but then had nowhere to start.
Yeah.
Spring and then React is the same, right? Like I want to use React, but it's like, well, it's not quite that straightforward. You take this sort of template.
Yeah. React did a thing as well, which we haven't talked about, which was they added JSX to JavaScript as like an extra language feature, which is controversial, completely separate from React, but you could basically put sort of HTML in the middle of your code natively.
So if I said to you PHP,
somehow it's different,
but it's the same.
But it
is the same though, right? Because you have HTML and then code in the middle of it. It's like ASP as well.
Yeah,
and JSP.
So I have to try and remember PHP. PHP is like
you put the angle %.
So
and then you put the PHP
so you're
code.
kind of coding in HTML.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you're like, kaboom! I'm not coding in HTML anymore.
I'm doing PHP.
This is the inverse. So this is like you're coding along in JavaScript.
Yeah.
And then you can write I'm going to get the words wrong because my computer science degree is waning. They should take that degree. But I think you can write literals. So you can write an expression which is looks like a piece of HTML. So it'll be like angle bracket P close angle bracket. Like hello, and then you finish it off. And that is like a new type that they've added to the language. That's how I think of it. So like you have strings and you have numbers, and now you have HTML stuff like as a type. That you can just immediately you can jump into angle brackets at any time, and that's the thing. So you can say like var x equals, and then you can say like angle brackets div, and you assign it to x, and now x is a div, and that's what JSX is. So it's kind of the inverse of like what I would call a template.
I guess you're saying, but I guess it's a separate discussion as to whether combining your sort of view with your logic in the same file is a good idea, right?
Yeah, so when they made React and they were like, what we're going to do is allow you to assign HTML to variables, and there is sort of some templating features in there as well, and then you're going to write views, or like views not the right word, but you're going to write like what they call components. You're going to write like your sort of view logic, and you're going to mix up code and HTML together, just like stir the pot. People lost their minds, and then I think they went away and had a look at it, and they came back and they were like, this is like a game-changingly good thing. And since then, so like Vue.js does it. Angular doesn't quite do it the same. Angular doesn't do it in such a purist way, but because what React really is, and I think Vue and Preact and all of these sort of things, is all it really is at its core is a function where you give it some data, and then it returns this HTML type, which I just mentioned, which they call JSX. And that defines like data comes in, like HTML comes out. And what React does is it runs all those functions and then puts the HTML on the screen and makes sure it's always up to date. So as the data changes, the HTML is just rendered on the screen. And that's all it really is.
But React on its own doesn't do that, does it? Because there's other pieces that do the state change tracking and stuff.
No, it does. It does. So it does all the DOM diffing.
Yeah, but as in state tracking is in internally, right? Like you're going to be like, oh, this variable's changed. React doesn't track that variable, right?
No.
There's a Redux or whatever it is.
So you can use Redux.
JS and all that stuff.
Yeah, React can do it. So React has a concept of state, which does do that.
Oh, okay.
And Redux just uses that. So Redux is like kind of an extra bit. But like you don't need it, so it will track all the things you can write. Any app that you can write with Redux, you could write without, just using React, and that's basically that way of writing UIs. Is I don't want to use the word addictive, but like it's like I just find it super fun because it's like really easy and like it's very functional, and you're just like data comes in, UI comes out. You just like write them, and then it just like magic happens and it's on the screen. It's super cool. But yeah, they added like HTML into the language for their own needs, and now it's become really standard. But the JSX thing, which is what this language feature is called, is technically agnostic to React. It's like a set, which is very good, like clever of them. It's not proprietary at all. I don't think you can use JSX with something else.
Yeah, I guess because realistically, right, you don't know how long React's going to be around for.
No, yeah.
The next new thing could come around at any point.
I think the other options do still use JSX, I assume. I've not seen them.
I think
Preact probably does.
Is it Ember.js?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that uses something that looks very similar.
Yeah.
I had played around with it ages ago, and I feel like it's whether they might not have called it JSX. I think they have a different suffix, but it's very similar.
But it's become very, very popular. When I was looking at that state of JS, it's 2018. It's React is like crushing it still. So it's like
I get because I think the majority of its use is still for displaying web pages in people's browsers, right? So DOM manipulation is still pretty important.
Yeah, not a thing that's going to go away just yet until we get the VR headsets. And even then, we may use it. Who knows?
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting to see where it goes. Because I still think the core language itself, although it's been made a lot of improvements, it started from a pretty poor base.
It did, yeah.
And that's the problem. And I wonder at some point whether that gets the better of it.
Well, the plan is, I guess, WebAssembly for a long time, but that doesn't seem to. I haven't seen much progress on that front.
ASM.js and all that stuff, right?
Yeah, so that can go away once WebAssembly's done,
Yeah.
and you'll be able to just write C# and compile it to this generic assembly for the browser. But not seen it yet. But
no.
The thing I would really like to see as well, whilst we're talking about JavaScript, is a sort of. I don't understand why somebody can't build something like NPM that just works for all languages. Maybe that's too much to ask, but I don't really feel like there's anything fundamental about the way NPM works that should mean that. Yeah. I don't know.
It would actually make a lot of sense with C++ because you have to have all the headers and stuff, and it would actually be. And generally, having been doing it recently, you're always like, oh, where do these headers live? But if you had like a node modules folder, you'd be like, well, all my headers are in here.
No, I don't know.
It would make
It can build C++. I don't know exactly how that works. I just watch it do it, and I'm just amazed. But yeah. I think that's JavaScript. Unless you got anything else.
No. I was just. I feel like there's a lot in there. We've been talking for a long time.
You can cut it all out later.
Yeah, it'll just be one blank episode.
Yeah, it'll be me talking about JavaScript for about 10 minutes.
So JavaScript, the end. It's like Jas has aggressively cut it all out.
It would just be you going, it's rubbish. and then me flapping a bit, and then just like, over.
not that we're biased. But yeah, no, I think we're done. I think we're done on that.